Hello, and welcome to the MCAP Fall Webinar Series 2020. Today, we launch our first webinar in a 6-part series. Please visit our website for dates of upcoming webinars and additional resources. The website link will be made available on our chat box. My name is Dr. Alma Castro, the Director for the Multilingual California Project, a 3-year grant awarded to CABE in March through the CDE Educator Workforce Investment Grant to support professional learning opportunities for teachers and paraprofessionals across the state for implementation of the EL Roadmap policy. The MCAP Alliance includes CABE and 5 county offices of education in Butte, Fresno, San Bernardino, Orange, San Diego, and San Diego State University. The MCAP builds on a robust body of research documenting multilingualism as the most effective option for the academic achievement of English learners across all content areas and for preparation to participate effectively in the global workforce. As we get ready for today's exciting session, I have a few housekeeping matters to share. As this is a webinar, the speaker's microphone will be active and the participants' microphones will be on mute. If you would like to pose a question during the presentation, please use the chat icon on the Zoom control menu. You'll see it there at the bottom of your screen. Just click it and the chat window will pop up. You may type in your comments and questions, and we may have some time after the session to answer some of those questions. After the webinar, we will post the recorded version of the Multilingual California website so that you can re-listen and share it with others. There's no password needed. So for now, please sit back, relax, and get ready for 45 minutes of powerful online engagement and learning. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce and welcome Anya Bobadilla, our CABE Professional Development Specialist, who will be presenting today on Designated ELD, sentence unpacking in small groups. Welcome, Anya.
Everybody, I'm so excited to be a part of this, our very first MCAP webinar. Like Alma previously mentioned, my name is Anya Bobadilla. I am the Professional Learning Specialist for CABE. Today, we will be focusing on Designated ELD, sentence unpacking in small groups. And we'd like to first start with just welcoming you. If you haven't done so already, I've already seen some of you in the chat, writing your name, what district you're from, your current position. We just really want to know who's in our audience. And throughout the webinar, we'll also be putting links in there for our participation link and a feedback survey at the end of our webinar. We also invite you to write any burning questions that you may have, that you have throughout any information that's given. We do want to try to address them during the webinar, and hopefully we have time at the end. So we do want to start with some ELD policy connections. And we know that most of you here already know most of these, but we do want to do a quick overview of what our ELD policies are and how they are directly aligned to supporting our EL students, especially during this pandemic. So we want to start off by talking about the California English Learner Roadmap Policy, which was approved unanimously on July 12, 2017 by the California State Board of Education. This policy ushers in a new era of English learner education, which embraces linguistic diversity as an asset while providing the supports necessary to allow English learners meaningful access to intellectually rich and engaging curriculum. This document was developed with input from teachers, parents, administrators, county offices of education, and other agencies that assist schools to prepare California's over 1.3 million English learners for college, career, and civic participation in our linguistically and culturally diverse state. And we have this graph here to really think about how ELD works in our teaching. So the outer ring we have here identifies the overarching goals of ELA literacy and ELD instruction. So by the time students graduate high school, they have skills such as being broadly literate, ready for college, career, and citizenship. The white field here represents the context in which instruction occurs. So the framework asserts that the context of learning should be motivating, engaging, integrated. Circling these standards are the key themes. So these themes, such as meaning making, effective expression, they highlight the interconnections between these California Common Core State Standards and the ELD standards, which are in the center. We also want to take a look at what ELD is. So as educators, we really want to focus on how ELD is really an opportunity for students to develop the language of English while they're concurrently building content knowledge. It is dependent upon the ELD standards and English learner proficiency levels, and it is required of every classroom, regardless of whether it's a single English learner in that classroom. Now that we've taken a look at what ELD is, we also want to take a look at what ELD is not. And ELD is not simply remediation or intervention. It is not simply an extra dose of content instruction. It's not the sole use of using sentence frames or pre-teaching vocabulary. It's not optional for classrooms. And like mentioned before, it's not just the use of SEDI strategies, Kagan strategies, unless they are used in tandem with ELD standards. And so we do have two types of forms of ELD. We have our integrated ELD, where all teachers with English learners in their classroom use California ELD standards in tandem with the California Common Core State Standards for ELA literacy and other content standards throughout the school day and across all subjects, as you can see here. And today our main focus is really talking about that designated ELD time, which is a protected time during the regular school day in which teachers use the California ELD standards more as their focal standards in a way to build into and from content instruction in order to develop those critical language thinking skills that English learners need in order for them to understand the content they're learning in English. And so these two, integrated and designated ELD times, really work in tandem. The designated ELD time supports the integrated ELD time. Our California ELD standards came about as a result of the adoption of the Common Core State Standards in 2010, which in turn, 2 years after in 2010, ELD standards were aligned into our Common Core English or ELA standards. Our ELD standards have 3 separate parts. Part 1 is really focusing on interacting in meaningful ways through collaboration, interpretation, and production. Part 2 is more about learning about how English works by structuring cohesive text, expanding and enriching ideas, and connecting and condensing ideas. Part 3 is more of the use of foundational literacy skills. And within those ELD parts, we also have proficiency levels, which are emerging, expanding, and bridging. And so before we go on to our next part, we just want to see if there's any questions that have been coming up from anybody. Also a reminder that the survey is going to be in the chat box. So I don't know if there's any burning questions that we might have. Otherwise, we can just move on through. Yeah, okay. So we're gonna go ahead and talk about how we want to use, how we really want to instructionally plan for our designated ELD time. And just a reminder, regardless of the model for instruction, whether it's hybrid, distance learning, 100% in person, all English learners must receive this designated ELD time. It is required. And so we want to recognize that there's no single EL profile and no one-size-fits-all approach that works for all English learners. So as educators, we really want to take a really good look at what is encompassing each level, whereas emerging, expanding, and bridging. And that way we can really cater to our students when we are providing that designated ELD time for them. The reason we do want to create these groups is not because we want to segregate them. We don't want to isolate them. It's not intended also to preclude non-ELs from receiving similar instruction. It's because this is really the only time that they're going to be in these homogeneous groups. They are in heterogeneous groups for the rest of the day, except during this designated ELD time where we're focusing on assisting them. So right now, how often should we be meeting with our designated groups synchronously? Right now, that most of us are on through virtual learning. So we really want to be meeting with them 5 days a week. We want to be meeting with them 30-minute sessions, and we want to differentiate these activities based on these proficiency levels that we've mentioned previously. So a good way to do this is to create breakout rooms based on these proficiency levels to provide even more targeted support for those groups. And we have just 2 examples of how it could look like for you. For example, meeting with your students 5 days a week and alternating between 15 to 30-minute sessions. So for example, if we look at this schedule here, I would be meeting with my emerging group Monday through Friday, 30 minutes a session, with my expanding group only 20 minutes, and be meeting with my bridging group 15 minutes a day. If that's something that doesn't seem as possible, another example could be meeting with them 3 days a week, but really making sure that it is for those 30-minute sessions. But for example, we can have our emerging group seeing them Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays for 30 minutes, having a break from that group on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. I pick up my expanding, alternating the days that I'm meeting with them, but making sure that I'm still meeting those minutes with them. So here's just also an example of things that we could do. If we have synchronous ELD, some options is we can schedule live virtual lessons via Zoom, Google Meets, whatever, in small groups, whatever platform that your district is using. We can schedule live virtual lessons via Zoom, Google Meet, in mixed groups to build some fluency. And we really do want to try to make these interactive and rigorous. Either option must focus on teaching the ELD standards first and then supporting the content. Teacher feedback is very important as it provides students feedback for themselves on how they're progressing. If we have a student that is perhaps not somebody that is able to meet during those live times, phone calls could be made as well, where we have virtual lessons or phone call lessons with them. Some asynchronous ELD options could be previously recorded lessons and videos that we push out to students, having choice board activities that they can work on their own, having independent ELD activities either online or with paper and pencil, some reading logs, reading and or writing journals. And it is important to note that even though we might want to provide that asynchronous ELD time, it does not replace that synchronous ELD time that students really need in order to foster that oral language development. And our key considerations when designing our distance learning for English learners is to ensure that English learners access and engage with rigorous academic content while reaching high levels of support. So things like reading a text out loud to them during a synchronous session, recording ourselves so they can hear, creating graphic organizers. The second key consideration we have here is to provide English learners with structured opportunities for oral interaction. So those breakout rooms are really more of a structured way for them to practice the oral language development that you're modeling for them. And our third consideration here is to maintain that focus on that oral and written language development across content areas. It doesn't have to be only ELA, it can be anywhere that we notice that our English learners are struggling. And I guess before we go into our strategy, we do want to, since we kind of went over just some examples of what our designated ELD time could look like. I really just want to open it up to see if any of you in the chat can kind of share any ways that you are meeting with your designated ELD groups that's working, or maybe something that after hearing this information, you might think of, oh, this is a way that I can meet with my designated ELD group. So I really invite you to kind of share out if there's a way that you're meeting with your designated ELD groups that's really working for you.
Anya, I'm going to chime in here
Yeah,
very
go ahead.
quickly. I want to just thank our participants. Great questions on the chat box, and we will try to get to many of these questions. We're also going to download the chat so that we can address these questions and post responses on our MCAP website. And I know that a few folks had questions about the designated ELD and the examples that you provided. And so I invite you to continue to ask those questions. We will try to address as many as we can during the session, but please go ahead and share in the chat box any strategies that you may be using.
Yeah, thank you. And I've also been seeing questions about if this is being recorded, and yes, it will be made available onto our website, which we will give information about at the very end. And so I see a lot of how some schools are on block schedules. You meet 90 minutes a day. Creating 2 separate breakout rooms, that's a great idea. Let's see. Yeah, these are all great. They're just coming in. I'm having a hard time keeping track. But yes, great ideas about how we really want to make sure we are meeting those needs of our EL.
One great idea also was the breaking out into groups and providing students in small group opportunities.
Exactly.
By proficiency levels and using ELD curriculum. And I know that there are many other great ideas with the 90 minutes daily instruction for designated ELD in some cases for many of you.
Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and keep going because I do want to be mindful of your time, and we do have 30 minutes left. So we have now our strategy, which is sentence unpacking for group designated ELD. Before we really establish and start our lessons, we really want to establish virtual class norms for our students. So we want to make these visible for them, especially we have breakout rooms where some of them might be in a breakout room without us. We really want to make sure that they are cognizant of what their expectations are, whether it's in a breakout room with you, a breakout room by themselves. So we really want to post these up. These are maybe some examples for maybe some lower grades because they are a lot more visual. We have some examples as well that require a lot, maybe for upper grades that have more words. And so our language objective for our unpacking strategy is that the students will analyze the parts of a complex sentence from a text that they've been reading as evidence by deconstructing the parts of the sentence to show how the words create a deeper meaning of the text as a whole using collaborative conversations and a tree map. And when we talk about sentence unpacking, we have some LPAC connections that it's making through reading and writing. We're hitting on some ELD standards, and we're also making sure that they're hitting those language domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And so what is sentence unpacking? When we do sentence unpacking, it's taking a complex sentence. It could be a sentence with a long noun or verb phrases, and we really guide our students into unpacking it for its meaning. We do this through first modeling their thought process by using strategies such as think alouds. We then engage students in deciphering the meanings of the sentences. Students are guided through a technique of reducing dense sentences into a list of simpler sentences that when combined, they express the meaning of that original sentence. Some important features of the sentence are showcased here. So for example, if you need to specialize some vocabulary that students might not understand, some descriptive language, the use of conjugations, this is a time where we really promote that and emphasize that so that they can understand the meaning of the sentence. As teachers, we are going to be selecting a sentence which needs some unpacking of ideas from a text that we're already using. So this isn't a watered down text, it is a text that they'll be using in order to better understand the content areas that they're going to be practicing throughout the day. It's going to focus on various ideas that exist within that one sentence. So you unpack the meaning by writing simple sentences that express that meaning. And you focus on the form of the sentence. For example, are there certain words in that sentence that signify something? If, for example, you have the word so in a sentence, you can, this could signify that it's a cause and effect sentence. And you have your students guide you through steps 2 and 3 with the goal of explaining the sentence in your own words. So our first example that we have is, the sentence here is, as a forager bee collects nectar, she carries pollen from flower to flower. So we want to ask our students, okay, who is here? Well, there's a forager bee. The bee collects nectar. The bee carries pollen to many flowers. Here we notice that the word as might be a little confusing to some of our ELD students. So we want to let them know that the word as in the sentence means at the same time. So you encourage them, promote for them to read the original sentence, replacing the word as with at the same time. Now, if we have an EL group that needs a little bit more support, we might also have some vocabulary words that we want to really kind of hone in on. So what is the word forager be? We really want to be able to tell them that a forager is a person or an animal that searches widely for food. We want to remind them what nectar is, that it's a sugary fluid that's secreted from plants, bees use this to make honey and pollen. And we might provide them as well with the sentence frame. If we just verbally tell them, oh, we replace as with at the same time, they oftentimes need that visual. So changing and providing this whole entire part of at the same time, underlining it, making sure that they're aware that that's what the intention of our activity. And so the sentence now we want to really discover is that what does this sentence really mean? If we switch off the word as for at the same time, it really means that the bee is collecting nectar and carrying pollen from flower to flower at the same time. So this bee is going around flying, collecting this nectar, but also at the same time or simultaneously carrying pollen to other flowers. We're going to move on to our next sentence unpacking example. And for this one, we're going to use a tree map. So for this one, we have 3 focus questions that really assist our students in solving what the meaning of a sentence is. And we ask them what is happening, who or what is involved, and what are the circumstances involving this action. So we do this because we want them to really repackage the meanings into their own words and think more deeply about that original sentence. And so the sentence we have here comes from a story called Maggie's Chopsticks. And we notice here that Maggie is sitting with her mother. And it's very small, but it says, I am Maggie, mother scolds, watching with her eagle eye at how I hold my chopsticks. And that's the sentence we're going to be focusing on. So for this activity, we actually have that same tree map model for them, but it's empty, and we really are working with our students to provide those answers and guide them to build those answers. We can also highlight certain vocabulary words that we don't understand and provide that support for them. So if I notice that a student needs that extra support, I can provide them with a visual of the word scold, of the eagle eye, and also an image of what that page is like. So for this one, it could also work where we have breakout rooms where students are in breakout rooms with you, breakout rooms with their homogeneous groups, and they're trying to decipher what is happening here, who or what is involved, what are the circumstances. After they're in their breakout rooms, we call them back on into our whole group, and together we can find out what is happening. So what is happening here? Maggie's mother is watching her hold chopsticks. Who or what is involved? Well, we know Maggie's involved, her mother, chopsticks. So what does this mean? Maggie's trying to hear shrimp because we saw in that visual that she's eating shrimp, but her mother's looking at her as if she's, not doing it right away. And so students can also even add inferences. Well, how might Maggie feel? She might feel bad about herself. Her mother's just staring at her while she's using these chopsticks. We have an example as well with our tree map for some upper grade or even high school students, because we also have those EL students in those grade levels as well. So for here, we have an excerpt from the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, where we have our sentence here: my long crushed spirit rose, cowardice departed, bold defiance took its place, and I now resolved that however long I might remain a slave in form, the day had passed forever when I could be a slave in fact. And so same situation, I provide my students with a tree map. I can provide them with supports on some certain idioms that might be in here, some vocabulary word. And again, I can break them out in breakout rooms. I can have them together as I guide them. But really the purpose is to try to get that meaning. So what is happening here? Slavery is coming to an end. Who is involved in this? Frederick Douglass. And so what is happening here with him? He's processing what it means for slavery to no longer be allowed, yet dealing with the scars of being a slave. And our last example that we have is actually a math example, because we really want to focus and make sure that we're targeting our students' needs, which could also encompass math. So for this quick example, we have Maya has 56 markers, Brian has 30 markers. How many total markers do they have? We can do a number bond. If our students are struggling with English, where they don't understand this, we can use that same tree map in order to assist them. What is happening here? Maya and Brian have markers. Who is involved? Maya, Brian, her markers. And what do we need to do? Well, we need to find out how many total markers they have. And the word total here is highlighted, where we can really support them. And well, when we do math, what does that word total mean? Do we add, subtract? Really urging our students and guiding them to solve that problem. And in addition to doing all of these supports, we also want to make sure that we're assessing. So when we do our sentence unpacking, we want to assess students orally and writing to make sure that they are able to do these activities as well on their own. So how can we assess writing in distance learning? And one of the ways we can do that is by pushing slides out, similar to the ones here, through Google Classroom or whichever other platform we're using, where students can type out their responses directly into the tree map. We can have students just type their responses in our chat box, send them to us privately. We also want to make sure that students are, we want to include writing journals and pencils with our students, because we know that sometimes we are in this virtual world, our internet might disconnect, so our students might also need that pen and paper modal. So we really want students to be writing the sentence and or sentences in their journals, then later submitting it through Seesaw, Google Classroom. They can show you their work directly on your Zoom screen. They can take a picture of the sentence and send it to you either via phone, email, Padlet, any other really source that you've been using. One of the things that we really suggest as well, so students aren't just writing on paper and showing you answers, really providing them with a whiteboard if you have one, if your classroom, if you're a lucky person that has a whiteboard in your classroom. But if not, we can also do DIY pocket protector whiteboards, where we use a white sleeve, put a white cardstock sheet in there. And so after using the sentence unpacking strategy for at least a week, we really want to assess our students during this time orally as well, to make sure that we really pay attention to their oral language responses. When we do that, we want to track the quantity of responses each student makes. We want to track the length of responses that each student makes. And when they're responding, we want to track what their responses are doing. Are they building on the responses of other, adding details? Are they elaborating, using evidence? And we also want to make sure that their speech is clear and their speed, oh, I'm sorry, I jumped. And if it's choppy or not. And we have a form which right after, we have some resources for you. So we also have a sheet that we can use to record these oral responses that our students are giving us. And I know we have a couple minutes left, so we also wanted to share some resources with you. And I also think that this might be a good time to remind you, if you haven't done so already, to please complete our participant form that's been put in the chat. We also will be sending out a feedback survey, and we really encourage you to really complete that. This will really help tailor our webinars for the future. This is our very first one, so we really want to make sure that these are catered to you, and also be able to provide you with resources that you need. So during our designated ELD time, we also want to make it a little bit more interactive for students. So a way for us to call on our students could be using a wheel of names. So this is a really quick website where all you do as a teacher is input student names, and it calls on students, which works great, especially for our ELs that aren't as willing to share. We really want to encourage them to share a lot more in our classroom. Another support that we have is, and I don't know if some of you are aware, but we have this, there is a website called otter.ai, which records the conversations that you are having. So for example, if you're doing a lesson, you can record that lesson. It gives you maybe like 600 minutes for free. You can always upgrade, but you can also save those files and send those out to students. So if it's an example that maybe you're doing in classroom, students don't quite understand it at that moment, they can always have that recording that you can push out and they can do during their asynchronous time. Another good resource to know is that Google Slides provides closed captions for students. So while you're presenting something on Google Slides, students can also be following along and reading what you're saying, which really assists in our EL students that maybe can't correctly hear what you're saying, but they can perhaps read it. And we also want to just make you aware that we do have a form that I believe we can put in the chat as well, which provides all these links. So it will have our assessment. It'll have a copy of our tree map that we've shown you, as well as these links to these websites that I've just referred to. So we really invite you to use them, utilize them, and really it's most for our students. You know, we really want to make sure that we're focusing on those EL students, which we know during this pandemic are really our students that are struggling the most at the time. And our last thing, we really want, as a reminder, and I've already said it, I know, but we really want and really want to reiterate that your opinion is important to us. And as this is our first of 6 fall webinars, we really want to make sure that you take the time to complete our feedback survey. It'll really assist us in catering these next webinars to your needs, making sure that we are addressing what is important to you. And so I just want to thank you very much for joining us. And I'll go ahead and pass it along to Alma as well.
Thank you, Anya, for sharing some great ELD strategies, ideas, and supports for English learners. Again, we invite you to share on the chat box any suggestions on professional learning that you would like to see in the future, as we are able to continue to work with our MCAP team to tailor to those professional learning needs that you and your districts may have. We won't have time to get to all of the questions today, but we will download a complete script of a webinars chat and send it out via our MCAP website. Our next webinar that we'd like to invite you to is on Wednesday, October 7th at 3:15 on the topic of dual language in Espanol. You may register now, and the link will be placed on the chat if you'd like to register now. Again, we invite you to subscribe to our MCAP website for updates on upcoming free webinars, resources, and events. You can go to multilingualcalifornia.org. Again, multilingualcalifornia.org, and the link will be placed in the chat box. We hope that you and your families continue to stay safe managing the circumstances due to COVID-19. We are very grateful that you are here with us today and invite you to our future webinars presented by the MCAP team. Remember, we have 5 more free webinars as part of this MCAP series. Thank you to our MCAP team for collaborating, and thank you to all of our participants here today. On the chat box, we have the participant survey that we'd love to get your input on. And again, muchísimas gracias. Thank you for your participation today.
I'm going to interrupt you, Alma, because I do have a question. So during just during my experience, because I was teaching during when the pandemic first started, so a strategy like this would be something that I'm using, just using Google Slides, because for me that seemed to be the easiest way. I was using Google Classroom, I'm sorry. And so when I would do breakout rooms, I would put them in breakout rooms, have these Google Slides provided for them. I know it was a little bit rushed, but I didn't want to just miss out and cut out. But so that was the way that I would kind of do the sentence unpacking strategy, where I'm reading to them out loud, later on providing those images as Google Slides, the tree map as Google Slides as well, where students can fill that in. And if we do have a couple minutes, I don't know if we want to answer a couple of questions, Alma.
Anya, there's another question about the sentence unpacking strategy and the opportunity to do this with elementary or middle and high school students. If you can share some experiences with this.
Yeah, so same thing. And I had, it kind of, I believe, goes with this question right now asked by Alexandra. So how do we show this slide? I provide them with the link. So I make sure that the link is accessible. Like when you do have breakout rooms, you can send messages to like an all message and have those slides and links provided for them. With middle school, high school, the tree map would work the same, and it really depends on the EL level of my students. If they do need that visual, I would provide them with a visual. Of course, I would really try to, at that point, cater the visuals not as elementary level visuals, but really making sure that those visuals are there for them to understand. And where do we get the links for the next to last slide? What was that question?
Sonia, there's another question, and the question is about these types of supports of sentence unpacking and supporting students with special needs or newcomer students.
Yes, of course. We want to be able to support our EL students, and I really think, like mentioned, it's really worth to be taking note of what are those levels in the ELD proficiency and where our students stand, and really hone in on what it is that they need. If they are in immersion, it would be a lot different support than a student that is bridging. And so those breakout rooms are a great opportunity because I can be meeting with my emerging group and doing certain strategies that might be their supports, whereas other students might not need all of those visuals.
Thank you. We know that during distance learning, there is a lot of need out there with engaging all of our students in oral output and developing vocabulary. And we know that teachers are doing such an amazing job at preparing lessons, delivering synchronous instruction as well as asynchronous instruction. Are there, Anya, there were some questions about what are some ways to use the strategy presented today in a whole group? And I think you've already talked about this a little bit, and also in small group based on the proficiency levels.
Yes, of course. I mean, if I have a group that might not need that support of the tree map, it would be something that I don't provide to them. And really, really catering as to what they need. So those supports, maybe those visuals could just go to one group. And I know Google Classroom really does have that feature where you can assign certain students work, and it doesn't not necessarily have to be a whole group assignment. So if I do have my EL group, and I really want them to just work on these vocab words, I can assign that to them, and they can know how to pull that up when they're in their breakout room, whether they're in a breakout room without me, they're in a breakout room by themselves. And at that same time, I can be using some other supports with a different group.
Thank you,
And how often, I'll just, I guess, answer this one. So how often would you use this? I would really it really does take a lot as teachers, and that's why we really want to first choose a sentence that we're going to unpack and make sure that it's a sentence that is going to be necessary for them to utilize. It's not going to be just a simple, our first sentence we read. We really have to think about, is this sentence going to be important for them to understand the main idea or the cause and effect, whatever strategy or concept we want them to focus on.
Thank you, Anya. Thank you. I know we have a couple of minutes and to answer other questions that you may have. I also, again, just want to invite all of you as participants to please register, subscribe to our MCAP website, where we will continue to share the resources that you were provided today, responses to many of the questions that we didn't get to on the chat, as well as the recorded webinar for today. We also have other timely resources. We know that many of our schools are working on finalizing their learning continuity plan and addressing the needs of all English language learners, biliteracy programs, and dual language programs. So we have an excellent resource on our MCAP website. If you click and subscribe, you'll be receiving a free access to that resource. Again, we invite you to the next webinar, which will be October 7th on dual language in Espanol. And Anya, I'm not sure if you'd like to say a few words on an introduction, brief introduction of dual language in Espanol for October 7th at 3:15 p.m.
So yes, on October 7th, we're going to be having our dual language in Espanol. That webinar will be all in Spanish, and we really, similar to this, but really want to focus on that oral language or oracy in our dual language students in Spanish. So we really invite you all to come. We're really excited to really get started with these webinars to provide you with all the supports that you need.
Wonderful. Thank you all again for your questions. We will stay on the line for a few more minutes. If you have other questions or comments, again, we thank you. Anya, thank you so much for presenting for us today. Thank you to the MCAP team and all of the support staff and participants. Please feel free to get access to our recording for today and the resources and share those with your colleagues. Please stay safe and continue to advocate and work hard for all of our children across California. Thank you. We are seeing on the chat as we finalize some interest in webinars for supporting newcomer students and interest in oral language rubrics or assessment materials that we may have. Thank you for those suggestions. Again, more interest on newcomer webinars. And thank you, Claudia, for your suggestion on target language development and translanguaging. More interest on newcomer webinars. A priority for standards for ELD. And oral language placement. Thank you. Please remember, if you have not completed your participant survey, Alexandra will post the link on our chat. and I know many of you are still here with us. Please go ahead and complete it. Your feedback is very valuable as we together tailor the supports that are needed out in the field and to provide this professional learning supports to you and your colleagues. We're seeing interest on parent engagement support during these times. Simple strategies, effective strategies. Thank you all for participating. Have a good evening. Buenas noches. Gracias por su participación. Thank you, Anya Bobadilla, for presenting for us this afternoon. Have a good evening. Buenas tardes.